soul in all bodies, and who understands that neither the soul nor the supersoul within are destructible, is ever destroyed, and he actually sees. So we learned this in chapter 2, how the body is perishable and the individual soul, and in this verse we learn even the supersoul, or shall we say what to speak of the supersoul, is ever destructible. For the soul slays not nor is slain, if you recall chapter 2. The soul is imperishable. One who sees the supersoul equally present everywhere in every living being does not degrade him or herself by one's mind. Thus one approaches the transcendental destination. So we also learned in chapter 5 how the humble sages see equally different bodies because they are seeing the soul and supersoul, and as we learned here, equally. The soul is the same in quality within each body, and we learned in this chapter there's only one supersoul, although manifested in every body. I gave the example of the one sun manifested in the pots of water. So if one has this vision that things are simultaneously one and different, then you can approach the transcendental destination. Krishna continues, one who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. Yes, the soul is simply desiring. Krishna is sanctioning, and everything else that's going on in this material world is like a machine, cause and effect, happening the body and the modes of nature. That's all that's going on. The soul is actually doing nothing. It's simply experiencing or witnessing the reactions of the body, mind, and senses with the modes of nature and the objects of the senses. When a sensible person ceases to see different identities due to different material bodies, and one sees how beings are expanded everywhere, one attains to the Brahman conception. Again, this is very reminiscent of what we learned in chapter 5. Pandita Samadarshanaha. The learned person goes beyond the ephemeral differences between bodies and understands that in the background there is simply the soul and the supersoul. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, the soul does nothing, nor is it entangled. Same concept, Krishna is repeating it. The soul is simply existing. All the different causes and effects are happening on the material plane. Now he gives a nice example to help illustrate this point. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all pervading. So now try to visualize this. This is a nice example given by Krishna. The sky is all pervading, but it doesn't mix with anything. Similarly, the soul, situated in Brahman vision, does not mix with the body, although situated in that body. Again, achintya beda beda tattva. The soul is in the body, but technically not. This takes some time to understand completely. And as you progress in your study of Bhagavad Gita, and especially as you perform Krishna consciousness or devotional service, you will get a realization of these concepts. I've been practicing Bhagavad Gita for over 30 years. It's not that I had so much of a high realization at the beginning, but because, as we learned in this chapter, I heard from the authority, I heard from my spiritual master. And because I engaged in Krishna consciousness, then little by little, the realization or understanding of Bhagavad Gita becomes more enhanced. Bhagavad Gita is not simply an academic study. No, there is requirement of realization. We learned that in chapter 6. The yogi, by means of acquired knowledge and realization. Realization comes when you begin to put the Bhagavad Gita into practice. If someone simply academically studies Bhagavad Gita, they're going to get very little realization. But when you begin to walk the walk, when you begin to talk the talk, in other words, when you begin to practice what Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita, then the knowledge becomes something that you tangibly taste. Throughout this Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has given definite instructions, always chanting. So if you chant Krishna's name, you will get realization. He also said, do everything for me. Whatever you eat, offer to me. So if we do these things, if we always think of him, if we bow down to him, if we worship him, when we actually do these things, then we will get realization. But unless we do these things, you won't get very much realization. Krishna continues, O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. So hopefully you have seen how this chapter is very reminiscent of what we learned in chapter 2 in the 20 verses where Krishna explained the difference between the body and the soul. But here we have gotten more details, and this example that Krishna has given, one sun in the sky illuminates everything. The sun is so powerful. In the same way, the individual soul is so powerful that it pervades the entire body with consciousness. Final verse of this chapter. Those who see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and who can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature, they attain to the supreme goal. So that process, that is what Krishna has been saying all along. Devotional service, Krishna consciousness, hearing, chanting, praying, serving, remembering, worshiping, doing everything for Krishna. And what is the supreme goal? He has already mentioned that in chapter 8. The supreme goal is Krishna's abode, where Krishna is eternally existing with all of his other devotees. And they're waiting for you. Yes, you can enter. And we learned already, Krishna said, having gone there, you don't come back here. So what are we waiting for? We should immediately engage in Krishna consciousness. And it's very simple. Even a child can engage in Krishna consciousness. So I want you all now to fold your hands and from your heart of hearts, engage in chanting Krishna's holy name. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bhagavad Gita as it is. Chapter 14, which has 27 verses, is entitled The Three Modes of Material Nature. In the first 13 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has repeatedly mentioned the modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Now in this chapter, he will go through a summary analysis of these three modes. Listen carefully. Verses 1 through 5 is the fundamental principles to understand the modes of nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Again I shall declare unto you this supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection." So the supreme perfection is the liberation from this material world. And the ultimate supreme perfection, Krishna has mentioned several times, to regain one's position as the eternal servant of Krishna in his kingdom, the spiritual world. Krishna continues, "By becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can obtain the transcendental nature, which is like my own. Thus established, one is not born at the time of creation, nor disturbed at the time of dissolution. The total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the births of all living beings." So here we see that everything comes from Krishna. Nothing is independent. Now listen carefully. It should be understood that all species of life are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving Father. So here we see where the concept of God as the Father comes from. Krishna is here stating that he is the Father not just of the human beings, but of all the 8,400,000 different species of life, out of which 400,000 are considered human, and out of those 400,000, a small percentage can be considered civilized. Material nature consists of three modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes in contact with nature, he or she becomes conditioned by these modes. So right here is the main problem, that coming in contact with these three modes of nature, the eternal living being becomes conditioned. The soul, the eternal living being, should be free, but because of association with these modes of nature, one gives up freedom and becomes conditioned. Now, in verses 6 through 18, Krishna will give an analysis of these three modes of material nature. O sinless one, the mode of goodness, being purer than the others, is illuminating, and it frees one from all sinful reactions. Those situated in that mode become conditioned by a sense of happiness and knowledge. So beginning with the best of the three modes, goodness, one becomes conditioned. It's not totally liberating. You get conditioned by a sense of material happiness and knowledge. But the good part is that it is illuminating. Continuing, Krishna says, the mode of passion is born of unlimited desires and longings. And because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to material fruitive actions. So here, the mode of passion is a little different. There is no peace in the mode of passion. Why? Unlimited desires and longings. We recall in chapter 2, when Krishna said, if you want peace, you have to become free from all material desires. But a person in the mode of passion has unlimited desires and longings, and therefore one is bound and conditioned to perform so many material fruitive actions. Now listen. O son of Bharat, know that the mode of darkness, which is born of ignorance, is the delusion of all embodied living entities. The results of this mode are madness, indolence, and sleep. So the mode of ignorance is the worst of the three. Indolence, he mentioned the word indolence. Indolence is inactivity resulting from the dislike of work. So the mode of ignorance, and what does he say? And this binds the conditioned soul. In the mode of ignorance, you are tightly bound. In the mode of goodness, you are somewhat free, but not completely free. In the mode of passion, you are bound up, but in the mode of ignorance, you are tightly bound up. Krishna continues, O son of Bharat, the mode of goodness conditions one to happiness. Passion conditions one to fruitive action, and ignorance, covering one's knowledge, binds one to madness. The verse said, covering one's knowledge. Knowledge means to understand that I am eternal, that I'm spirit soul, that I'm part and parcel of Krishna. So the mode of ignorance, I completely forget all these things, and I begin to perceive of myself as a material object, and I consider the satisfaction of my senses as the primary goal of life. Krishna continues his analysis. Sometimes the mode of goodness becomes prominent, defeating the modes of passion and ignorance. Sometimes the mode of passion defeats goodness and ignorance, and at other times, ignorance defeats goodness and passion. In this way, there is always competition for supremacy. So here we see why we are struggling here in this material world. There is no peace, there's no steadiness. There's a constant flux, a constant fight, so to speak, for supremacy of these modes of nature. Krishna continues. The manifestations of the mode of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. In chapter 5, we learned about the city of 9 gates, which was Krishna's figurative example of the material body. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, the mouth, genital, and anus. So, when you're in the mode of goodness, these different outlets, these different doors or gates of the body are illumined with knowledge. O chief of the Bharatas, when there is an increase in the mode of passion, the symptoms of great attachment, fruitive activity, intense endeavor, and uncontrollable desire and hankering develop. What's good about studying this chapter is that now you can begin to monitor yourself. You can begin to see how you are behaving. And if you become very familiar with this chapter, you can immediately detect what mode of nature is trying to make itself prominent on you. And with knowledge, as he said earlier in chapter 4, with the weapon of knowledge, you can slay lust, you can slay ignorance. So we must do this by applying Bhagavad Gita. When there is an increase in the mode of ignorance, darkness, inertia, madness, and illusion are manifested. When one dies in the mode of goodness, he or she attains to the pure higher planets of the great sages. So these higher planets, because the earth is situated in the middle of the universe, but above the earth are the planets of the demigods and great saints and sages. And you cannot enter these realms unless you have developed a sufficient quantity of the mode of goodness. he continues. When one dies in the mode of passion, he or she takes birth amongst those engaged in fruitive activity. That indicates you come back to earth as a human being. And when one dies in the mode of ignorance, he or she takes birth in the animal kingdom. And we recall in chapter 2, the greatest fear, the greatest danger is to miss the opportunity of at least human form of life. And that means going down lower to the 8 million species of life, animals, and so forth, lower than human being. And how do you get there? Fostering the mode of ignorance. The result of pious action is pure and is said to be in the mode of goodness. So pious action is outlined in the scriptures. Throughout this Bhagavad Gita, which is a summary of the Vedas, we have been advised by Krishna in so many ways to perform righteous, pious activities. So the result of that is you become purified. But action done in the mode of passion results in misery, and action performed in the mode of ignorance results in foolishness. The mode of goodness, real knowledge develops. From the mode of passion, greed develops. And from the mode of ignorance develop foolishness, madness, and illusion. Those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets. And those in the abominable mode of ignorance go down to the hellish worlds. So it is significant that as a human being, day by day, we are fostering a certain mentality or consciousness, and it is all dictated by the modes of nature. So it is no mystery, actually, what is going to happen to us in our next life. By the choices we make, the good or bad decisions we make, we are cultivating these different modes of nature. And our next birth will be the fruit or the result of those choices. By reading Bhagavad Gita every day, one can foster the mode of goodness, become indifferent to the mode of passion, and thoroughly condemn the mode of ignorance. This is what is advised in Bhagavad Gita. Now, in the rest of this chapter, Krishna will explain how to transcend the modes of nature, because, as we mentioned at the beginning, even though the mode of goodness is better than passion and ignorance, still you are conditioned, still you are bound, you are not free. You'll have to take birth again. And any kind of birth in this material world is a term of imprisonment. Krishna